In Arizona, a off-duty cop who had shot a man in a wheelchair from behind has been sued, saying that he acted with a deprived state of mind. The off-duty cop shot a man in a wheelchair from behind. Let's read more. The sister of a disabled man who had died after being shot multiple times by a police officer while using his wheelchair from behind has sued the officer and the city, claiming wrongful death. Richard Lee Richards is his name, 61, died in 2021 after being shot 9 times by the Tuscan police officer Ryan Remington, following an altercation in which Richards had allegedly brandished a knife, but he shot him from behind. Richards, who allegedly suffered a broken hip at the time, was in a slow-moving battery-powered mobility scooter. The attorneys have said in the complaint on behalf of Richards' sister that Richards didn't have to die that night. The lawsuit seeks to achieve a measure of justice for Richard Lee Richards and the survivors by establishing the obvious: an officer cannot shoot at someone in the back and kill a slow-moving shoplifting suspect in a wheelchair without warning when there's no imminent danger. Yeah. Tennessee v. Garner, incidentally, would be probably your best case on point. You can't shoot someone merely to stop them from fleeing. And it's like, oh, but he had a knife. Okay, was he imminently threatening anyone at that time? He's in a slow-moving wheelchair. It leaves a little bit to be desired. Remington, who was off-duty at the time, was working a special duty assignment at an area Walmart. Yeah, we've seen this shooting, incidentally. We saw this with this guy going through the garden center and the police officer shooting him. It was caught on tape. Was called to the Walmart shortly before 6. The employee had told Remington, the cop, that Richards had stolen a toolbox. Remington, who had been working with the department for 4 years, Remington, who had been with the department 4 years, joined the Walmart employee in the parking lot and followed Richards while attempting to gain his cooperation. The situation escalated from there. According to the employees, he caught up with Richards outside as he fled the store and asked to see the receipt for the toolbox. Instead of providing the receipt, Richard brandished the knife and said, "Here's your receipt." Not great. Officer Remington warned Richards to stop and surrender. Richards refused to comply and instead continued to head through the Walmart and Lowe's parking lot. According to the Walmart employees, Richards said, "If you want me to put down the knife, you're going to have to shoot me." As Richard approached the entrance to the garden section of the Lowe's, the officer, Stephen Taylor, arrived to assist Remington. Both officers were just a short distance behind Richard when they warned him not to enter the store. When Richards failed to stop, Remington fired 9 rounds, striking him in the back and side. He then fell out of his wheelchair. I'm not saying that you can't ever shoot a person in a wheelchair with a weapon. That would be ridiculous. A person in a wheelchair, of course, can pose a deadly threat to others. A person in a wheelchair with a knife can obviously pose a deadly threat. But there was no imminent threat at that time. He was going away from you and he wasn't going towards anyone else in a hurry. There were other options. Maybe less with the shooting them in the back. The Tuscan police chief said at the time, "To be clear, I'm deeply troubled by Officer Remington's actions." If you're deeply troubled, then I know we all feel much better. "His use of deadly force in this incident is a clear violation of department policy and directly contradicts our training." Remington was indicted on manslaughter charges. According to the complaint, there was no need for Remington to fire his gun at the disabled man. In the view of Remington, and even if he tried to flee, which that you can't shoot someone merely for fleeing, Tennessee v. Garner, his battery-powered wheelchair had a maximum speed not much faster than an ordinary walking pace. The complaint notes that the video shows Remington had been able to keep pace with Richards for several minutes as they traveled across the parking lot. After Remington fired his first 8 shots, he paused. The following facts were true in this moment. Richards was no longer moving. The wheelchair was stopped. Richards had dropped the knife and was unarmed. Richard was hunched over from 7 hollow point bullets that had torn into his body. Richard was not a threat to anyone, and the Lowe's store clerk had fled the scene of the Remington battery of shots that immobilized Richard, and the other officer had arrived and seen his backup with non-lethal tools. After pausing, Remington nevertheless fired a knife shot anyway, which would be excessive force on top of everything. That Remington fired the first 8 shots at the back of Richards as he sat there was unconscionable and disturbing, but the pause after the 8th shot, followed by the 9th, evidences a deprived state of mind. Hence, the charges for the manslaughter. Thus, that brings us to the end of the discussion of the off-duty cop who has previously been charged criminally and is now being sued for shooting a guy in a wheelchair who had a knife. Now, it seems based on evidence he was a valid suspect for shoplifting, and shoplifting is not good. The police have the right to detain him and arrest him in response to the probable cause for arrest. They had a valid complaint from a shopkeeper that identified him. This is a valid basis to stop. This is even a valid basis to arrest. But you can't just shoot someone to arrest them. Tennessee v. Garner. Can't do that. You can't shoot someone merely for fleeing. They have to pose a threat. A threat to you, a threat to someone. Anyone would be fine. But this guy wasn't. He wasn't posing a threat to anyone. He was moving away from the officers, and there was no one in his immediate front of him. The officers presumably could have done any number of things to stop him other than shoot him because he wasn't posing a threat at that moment. And so they shot him anyway 9 times and he died. So there's a lawsuit trying to bring some remedy to this. The police chief has already said it's a violation of all the training and procedures. So we'll see how this proceeds. We all know how difficult these lawsuits can be because of our favorite 2 words, qualified immunity. So is there a case that clearly establishes you can't shoot a handicapped man who's driving away from you while he has a knife? Well, I guess we'll find out. At least for a moment, that brings us to the end of discussion of that case.